Okay, so we're just picking out certain nakudas from the mimer. So I wanted to finish off last week a musig that the Rabbi Shvaseddin brings down here and in many other places. The musig of Kochos Hakelulim Benfesh and Etsem Noseh Kochos, which are brought down the end of the first mimer. See, the question that arises when we talk about Kochos and Etsem is that the emphasis very much in this hemshech is that the Kochos are Kochos mugbolim, Kochos with a gewisse tzia, as he calls them in the hemshech, pnimiyim be'etzem. That means they are made to measure. The lachatchila there's a koch hachachma, there's a koch habina. Each koch is mugbul and metsuya. It just takes time till it develops, until we're able to see the hagvala that's in the koch. But the koch is already mitzad atzmai an inyan of chachma and chesed. So there's 10 inyanim in the nefesh. On the other hand, the etzem nefesh is an etzem echad pashut. Etzem nefesh, nefesh achas. So the obvious question is, how do they interact? How do the 10 kochos come from an etzem echad pashut? Now, how they come, we're going to have to say that this has no beer. This the Eibishter made it like that. That there should be 10 kochos coming out of the nefesh. But we're not asking why they're like that. We're asking, how are the kochos found when you trace them back into the etzem nefesh? Can you still pinpoint inside the nefesh 10 inyanim and say, right, this will file cabinets inside the nefesh adam, that's chachma, this is chesed, and this is gvura? Or do we say it's a nefesh achas? So there seems to be a steer over here. If you say that 10 kochos mugbalim, and yet the nefesh is a nefesh achas poshut, so how do the eser kochos find themselves inside the nefesh? So obviously you're going to have to say, as we trace the kochos back, step by step, they become more and more bedakus, more and more mufshut, and less ba'agbala, less and less bitziu. Just there remains something of the tziyur. It's bekoyach, but it's not the same hagbala as the way it comes out begilui, right? So these are called the eser kochos haklulim benefesh. As you trace them back into the nefesh, they become more and more bottle, more and more hedar metsius. But once you get back to the etzem nefesh, the etzem mamish, which is an etzem echad pashut, so how there are the kochos inside the etzem mamish? So this is where the musa comes in of etzem noseh kochos. Whenever we say kochos haklulim in the nefesh, let's look at the wording. Let's examine the wording. You say kochos haklulim benefesh, and you say etzem noseh kochos. You can see from the wording itself that when you say kochos haklulim, you're starting with the word kochos. When you say etzem noseh kochos, you're starting with the word etzem. It's sort of like mulmata lamayla or mulmayla lamata. Are you starting with the kochos, or you're starting with the etzem? If you start with the kochos, which are a metsius, then you're always going to end up with a metsius. For example, what's one of the dugmois that you bring, that I brought down in Chassidus, for kochos haklulim be'etzem? One of the dugmois is a gashmistik, a dugma, is like eish inside the tzoah chalomish. That this eish, this fire, you can find inside this flint stone, but for years you don't see any fire over there. When you give a hakor to the stone, it gives out a spark. So where is the eish inside the stone? You're going to say it's kolol in the stone and an oifen of bittul b'metsius, heder hametsius. It's called the helem she'ena b'metsius. It's not like, for example, the fire that's inside a coal, that the fire is there b'metsius, you just don't see it because the coal is covering over it. If you give a blow, the fire will come out. Whereas the koyach ha'esh that's inside the oven, it's so behelem that you can break the stone in half, stick it in the ocean for years and years and years, take it out, and then it didn't change anything because there's no metsius of fire, it's only the koyach of fire. But even there, where the koyach of the fire is inside the stone, are you going to say that there's no metsius of fire? There must be a metsius of fire. V'hodaya, if you bang another stone, no sparks will come out. This stone, sparks will come out. That means there's something special about this stone. And also, what's going to come out of this stone when you give it a bang? A fire. It's not going to come out water. Maybe Moshe Rabbeinu can do that, but Al Pi Teva, You can't bang the stone and come from it water or something else, is dafka fire. So there must be a koyach meyuchad for eish, which is inside the stone, and dafka that is there. So there's a prat inside the stone, even though it's mamish behelim and it's called a helam she'enim b'metsius, but it's there. If we're going to compare that, the kochos Hakelulim benefesh, even though you're going to say the kochos are like the fire inside the stone, they're going to be bittul b'metsius, behed metsius, but sof kol sof, you can't end up saying that it's a nefesh achas. It's one nefesh. Because there's a nefesh plus. What's the plus? There's nefesh plus kecha chochma, kecha bina, kecha das, because only these 10 are going to come out, just like the stone. Only fire is going to come out of the stone, not water. Of this nefesh is only going to come out 10. We can pinpoint to a certain extent, in theory, we can say there's 10 things kollel inside this nefesh. So therefore, when we're talking about kochos Hakelulim benefesh, you're starting off with the word kochos, and you're going to end up with the metsius of kochos, even though they're going to be bittul and bedakas and bottle and etc. etc. But in the end, you're always going to end up with the metsius of kochos somehow. Heda metsius, but there's always something there. That's the difference between kochos Hakelulim benefesh and Etsem Noseh kochos. If we say the other words, we say Etsem Noseh kochos, we're starting with the word Etsem. When you start with the word Etsem, that means you're talking about the Etsem HaNefesh. We're not talking about kochos, we're talking about the Etsem HaNefesh. And what is this Etsem Noseh? What could come out of this nefesh? We know that since this is this particular type of Etsem HaNefesh, what type of nefesh? It's a nefesh of a ben adam. So this Etsem is Noseh, the 10 kochos which we know from experience that from this type of nefesh comes out 10 kochos. But what Etsem do we have? An Etsem echad pashut. Because Noseh doesn't mean there's anything there. Let's give a gashmistic example of Etsem Noseh. The gashmis, that would be, let's say I have a big piece of wood like this, or a big piece of silver. I can make from this piece of silver, quite a big large piece of silver, I can make a kois, a menorah, hundreds of different things. Somebody can make up a new shape that nobody thought of before. So when the piece of silver is untouched, the way it is one big block, a klotz of silver, what is the? Can you say that the kois that I'm going to be able to make from this piece of silver is kollel inside the silver? There's no kois hakollel b'silver. There's no metsius of a kois. Is there any bedakas like the eish b'tzorach halamish? No. There's no eish b'tzorach. There's no tzia of. There's no inyan of kois inside the silver. I may never want to take out a piece of a kois out of it. I may take the whole thing and make it into a menorah. So what is this piece of silver? It's Noseh, all types of tzuras that you can make out of silver. So what is he himself? He's Noseh. Noseh doesn't mean there's anything there but metsius. The same thing when they say the Etsem is Noseh kochos, we're talking about an Etsem pashut. Is there anything kollel there? No, we're talking about the Etsem mamish, nefesh achas. What can come out of this? 10 kochos. That happens to be that we know that from this nefesh comes out 10 kochos. But what's there now? It's an Etsem echad pashut. So we also have to be mechalik between kochos Hakelulim and Etsem Noseh. And you can tell by the words what you're talking about. Kochos Hakelulim, you're starting from the word kochos, and we're saying that kollel all the way back into the nefesh. And Etsem Noseh kochos, you're starting with the nefesh, the Etsem. And it's Noseh, whatever it's Noseh. Of course, there's only to be Noseh Eser kochos because it's an Etsem of a ben adam. Right, so we happen to know that from this nefesh is only going to come at Eser. But what's there now? An Etsem echad pashut. What would be the dogma of this Lamaila? The Dugmasim is a Yuvan Lamaila. When we're talking about Kochos Hakelulim and Nefesh, that would be a mashal, let's say for the Eser Spheres, Hakelulim in Oyer and Sof. That would be a mashal. Masha'inkin, if we go higher, let's say to Atzmos, or to Oyer, which is higher than the Spheres, there we wouldn't be able to say Klulim, we'd have to say it's Noseh Spheres. And if we're talking about Oyer and Sof, how many spheres is he Noseh? Legal spheres. We'll learn later that there is Taka Madrega Noir Sof, which is called from Eser spheres. That's the last Madrega Noir Sof. And the Madrega that's higher than that is called Oyer Sof, that there has there spheres ein kates. Those are. What's that?
Can you say the same thing in Nefesh? When it's lazy, it could have been legal.
You can't say that because the Etzem HaNefesh is still only an Etzem of a ben adam. So he's Noseh only as much as a nefesh of a ben adam can have. Because he's be'etzem, although he uses the expression as brigvo, but he's an etzem of a ben adam. And not all bnei adam are, even his etzem nefesh is not. He's not atzmas mahus. Atzmas and Mahus is Ein Sof, but Etsem of a Ben Odom is an Etsem Proti. We call it Etsem, but it's an Etsem Proti. It's an Etsem of an Odom. There's an Etsem of a Behema. He's nicer, let's say 7 Kochos, whatever a Behema has. And then there's the Etsem of a Tzimech, which is nicer, whatever the Tzimech are able to do. And so he's only nicer that which he's shaykhs to. Just like, let's use another example, the Etsem of the ground is nicer all smachim, right? What can you grow in the ground? You can grow apples, oranges, wheat, barley, whatever you want, all the different grains and things. So what is the ground? What's kollel inside the ground? There's nothing kollel inside the ground. The koyach hatzmicha shabaritz is nicer all smachim. Depends on what you're going to plant there. That's what it's going to bring out. There is another moshel that's brought down for the inyan of nicer, which is usually brought down. The Rebbe Nishrasim brings down elsewhere, and that is from the rakia, the sky. The sky has 360 degrees in a circle. So are there stop signs? Are there pockets over there? Something over there to split up 360 degrees? It's really an Etsem Poshet, but it's nicer 360 degrees. It's nicer this space. That's the moshel it's another moshel that's brought down. But I think silver is a lot more easy to understand. Huh?
In the silver, it's so easy just to carve out
A particular
menorah
tzir.
from. For the stone, you need a hakar.
True. That's because you're taking from the stone something else. You're taking the fire out of the stone, and the stone is going to remain whole. So the way the fire is inside the stone, it's behedam metsius, and it's like a ischachus. I'm not talking about if you're taking out something out here, you're going to actually take the silver itself and make it into the menorah. I'm talking about the tzir of the menorah, not the metsius of the menorah. The tzir of the menorah, is it inside the piece of silver? No, there's no tzir over there. So how many tziurim is this piece of silver nicer? Whatever tzir you want. But there's no tzir. You can't say that after you made the menorah, you're going to say, well, there's the menorah haklula b'ha piece of silver. There's no menorah kolol there. The metsius of the silver is going to be the same, but the tzir of the menorah is not kolol inside. It's nicer any tzura that you want.
And sometimes to make a certain surah, you need, like according to how big the
Of course, it's only as much as the piece of silver. But we're talking about in the inyan of tzir and pshitas. Is there tzir kolol in this slab of silver? The answer is no. There's no tzir kolol there. It's nicer any tzura. I was thinking once that one could actually examine the word Noseh itself. Noseh doesn't tell you anything about what you could be Noseh. As long as it's not too heavy, you could be Noseh anything. So what are you before you're Noseh the thing? You are you. And what can you be Noseh? Depending how strong you are, anything. You can be Noseh a feather, you can be Noseh an elephant if you're strong enough, you can be Noseh anything. So what, is there the feather Hakelulim inside you before you're Noseh? No. When I'm Noseh, that's when it starts. And what's beforehand? Nothing. It's just the ability to be able to. The ability that I can be Noseh this thing. So this piece of silver has the ability to make from it tziyurim. What's inside beforehand? Nothing. So I'll to the Etsem HaNefesh. Anyway, that was Benegir to the first Maimah. I just wanted to get that clear. It's a very Inyan Yesodi. Just to finish off the point, which is not Negir Mamish here, but Bechlal you're going to find this Inyan of Hiskalalus of Kochos. So maybe we should round up the different levels that they usually are discussed in Chassidus in all places. We have Kochos Hakelulim, that's the 10 Kochos. You have Kochos Hakelulim, and then you have Kochos, the Kochos Hakelulim would be called, no, start again. You have Kochos Hakelulim and Kochos Hiyulim, right? Hiyuli means potential. It's not yet Golui. Let's say the Koch HaMaskil before his Maskil Haskalis is a Koch Hiyuli. Higher than that, you have the way the Kochos Hayulim are kolul in the Etsem. Those are called Hiyulim Atzmiyim. And then you have Etsem Noseh. So there's generally four madregas. I don't know if there's any more than that. Kochos Hakelulim, Kochos Hiyulim, Kochos Hiyulim Atzmiyim, that means they're kolul in the Etsem. And then the fourth is not Kochos, but it's Etsem Noseh Kochos. So in Spheres Lamaila, what would they be? Let me just give you a duma. What would they be Lamaila? Kochos Hakelulim you see from the Maimah, is the Esses Sfiris of Atzilus. They're Golui because the Oiris have come into the Kelim, Sfiris HaChachma, Sfiris HaBina, that's called Giluyim. It's Kochos HaGiluyim. The Eibishter's Kochos HaGiluyim is the Esses Sfiris. The Kochos Hiyuliyim means before they actually came down into Gili would be, for example, if we take Chachma one step higher, before it came into Gili, it would be Chachma Stimor. That would be Chachma Klula B'Keser. It's called Chachma Stimor. Hiyuliyim Atzmim would be, let's say, Chachma the way it's called in Attic, or the way it's called in Oir and Sof. You can take them whichever level you want, however far you want to go up, but as long as there's a sphere of Chachma. And then you can go higher than that and you say Etsem Noseh Kochos, that's the way we're talking about Oir and Sof HaPoshut, where there's nothing there. When we get to the Esses Sfiris HaGnuzos Lifnat Tzimtzum, we're going to see that's going to be a whole shackle of Italian in the hemshech as to how to view those spheres. Are they like Kochos HaKlulim or Kochos Klulim Atzmi, or is it Etsem Noseh? We'll get to that later. Ne'elomim would be, it depends. Ne'elomim would probably be Kochos HaKlulim Be'etzem. Or Koch HaMaskil is also sometimes called Koch Ne'elam. Ne'elam is a bit, depends of Umeret. Ne'elam could be like Chachma Stimor, could be a Kochos Ne'elam, like Koch HaMaskil. Or you could be referring to Ne'elamim Mamish, which would be Kochos HaKlulim Benfesh. Usually when you talk about Kochos HaNe'elamim, like it says, for example, in an emergency sometimes, is Nisgala Kochos Ne'elamim. We're referring to Kochos HaKlulim Be'etzem, like things which are totally abnormal, totally out of the emergency brought out from him this Kochos Ne'elam. Anyway, that was when I get to the end of the first Maimah. The second Maimah is basically the Nimshal on the Moshel. Whatever was discussed in the first Maimah is now being discussed in the second Maimah in the Nimshal. And the main emphasis again being that the Kochos HaPnimiyim Be'etzem, so too the spheres, the oiris of the spheres are pnimiyim be'etzem. Right? So we're going to see over here comes out a very big yisoid over here, and Bemerson is yisoid all over the place. The yisoid that comes out over here is, when we talk about, it's going to come out throughout the whole hemshech as well, when he goes back to makifim and pnimiyim. When we talk about seviv and mamala, sometimes we can be led to understand that seviv and mamala be'etzem is oil. It's all the same oil, just some of it remains makif and some of it comes down in the pnimi. A bit like if you have a tank of water, the ocean, and then some from that ocean comes down into a pipe into your kitchen sink, so that's pnimi, came into your cup. Or you have the whole river which didn't come into your house, that still remains makif, it surrounds your house. That would be a very simple way of understanding. Makif, it's surrounding, it's not yet into the kelim, and pnimi is it comes into the kelim. But from here we understand that it's not like that. The difference between mamala, oiris pnimiyim, and oiris makifim is not just more or less, did it come into the keli or did it not yet come into the keli. That may be true. Here we see that the oir pnimi means that it's oir pnimi be'etzem. It's a different type of oir. It's a different type of oir. There's an oir which is lachatchila made for kelim. Mamala is an oir which is made to measure. It's an oir which is meyuad for a certain makabon. Just to bring a moshel for that, doesn't say it here, but this is in other places. The two types of oil. What would be the two types of oil? The oil which always remains makif, and the oil which is made to be pnimi. So the moshel that's brought down is there's two types of oil begashmis, more or less begashmis. You have an oil, for example, of a candle. Oil of a candle is oil abos. This is an oil which is made to shine to another place. So I can see in the corner where the chametz is. That's a regular oil. Then there's an oil, it says a pasuk, chachmas adam toiponov. A big chacham, a big tzaddik, a big chacham, his oil, his face shines. Anybody remembers seeing the Rebbe sometimes, you could see Tachem Fabring, there was like an aura around. You could see Begashmis, it looked like a shining. But that's already arguable if you saw Begashmis or saw Baruchnis, whatever it is. But let's take it at face value. Chachmas adam toiponov. Can you be boided chametz with that oil? Obviously not.
Like a light like this, you're saying?
This is a light that shines to make a dark room light. But if Chachmas Adam Toyaponov is machlichtig, that's not an oil that I can't be by the chametz with that. It's not. Even if it would be physical, it's not an oil that shines to someone else. The same thing is the difference between in the nefesh ha'adam. You have kochos let's say, what would be the difference between Sev and Mamala would be like Hashpo, Oyer HaMamala is to be Mashpia to a Makabel, and then there's a Gilui of the Etsem, it's called Hisgalas or Etsem, it's not made to shine to anyone, it's Toi Ponov. So, if it would be as simple as that, then a Maggid Shiur would not have to teach. He'd have to sit down and start shining, everybody understands. That would be Dach Meila. Toi Ponov. Doesn't go like that. He has to be Mashpia because Seichel is Pnimi, and you have to be Mashpia, the Seichel by from Pnimi. Masha'en Kain Giluim, which are not made for a Makabel, which is Sev of Kolam, is not made for anyone. It's just Hisgalas or Atzmus. Atzmus is Niskala by from the way Atzmus is Niskala. Toi Ponov of Atzmus. What does Toi Ponov of Atzmus look? The way he is. He's Ein Sof, his oil is Ein Sof. You want to be Mashpia by from Pnimi to Kelim, so you have to sort of form a different type of oil, which is called Pnimi Be'etzem. That's what the Esespheres are. Pnimi Be'etzem. They're made to measure. This is an oil Chachman, it's made to make. So you had to be Mechadish, a new type of oil within the oil and Sof. The problem that he's going to deal with later on is how do the two interact? Just like we were talking about before about Kochos Hakelulim and Benfesh, or Etsem Noseh Kochos. How the Kochos color and the Etsem, obviously they're going to have to be bittul over there. It'll, just like the fire is bittul inside the stone. So obviously the spheres, the way they are inside Eir and Sof, are going to have to be bittul over there. So how do they work? That is a pilpul later on in the hemshech. How do the spheres work when they're in Eir and Sof? There's only one last point I'd like to mention in the end of the second Maimah, Sif Ches, is where he starts introducing a very big yesod also about Kalim. Because there's the obvious stira which is brought down in many places at Benegir to Atzilus. We're talking about Atzilus over here, right? The Kochos Pnimiyim Be'etzem, Kochos Hakelulim is the Esespheres of Atzilus, we said before. So Atzilus sounds like it's a Gilui, the Kochos which were up there, the spheres which are Kolol in Eir and Sof, have now been Niskala in their Kalim. Kochos Hakelulim, spheres Hakeluyos. Good, so you got spheres Hakeluyos. If it's spheres and Eir, so it's all Gilui Ahelam, that which was up there comes out. Gilui Ahelam. If it's only Gilui Ahelam, so what does it say about Chachma Ayin Timatza, which means that Chachma is Yesh Mi'ayin? Famous stira. Is Chachma Datzil Yesh Mi'ayin or is it Gilui Ahelam? So in this Maimah he chooses the answer, which is the most simple way out of the problem. It depends if we're talking about Eiris or Kalim. The Eiris are Gilui Ahelam, the Kalim are Yesh Mi'ayin. Right? So this is where he starts introducing the musig of Kalim. And Kalim plays a very important role in the hemshech. We'll maybe discuss Kalim next time. Yeah, we'll get into Kalim next time. But basically, the inyan of Kalim is his chadshus of the tzimtzum. That's what you have to remember. That Kalim were not beforehand a metsius of Kalim in Eir and Sof. And Eir and Sof was his galas of Kochos Bligvul, which is Eir and Sof. And when was nischadish the inyan of Kalim? It was nischadish b'shas and tzimtzum. When you masalek the Eir and Sof, then is nischadish something else, which is called the Kochos Bligvul. Both are Kochos of the Eibishter, both are Kochos of Ein Sof. Like he brings always from Avedis HaKodesh. Ein Sof hu shleimus dekula. Shem sheyesh lekeach v'bilti ba'al gvul, kach yesh lekeach v'gvul. Shem tomer sheyesh lekeach v'bilti ba'al gvul, v'ein lekeach v'gvul, hata machas shleimusay. You have to have a Kochos Bligvul, you have to have a Kochos Gvul. The Kochos Bligvul is Eir and Sof, the Kochos Gvul is the Kalim, the Kshoyer Shakli. So both are Ein Sof, but the Kochos Gvul was Nisgala only b'shas tzimtzum.